You painted my car beige? I'm the chief of police, and that was a $60,000 classic Shelby. Chief Michael Robertson had spent the better part of 3 years restoring his 1967 Shelby GT500, a classic American muscle car worth well over $60,000. The midnight blue paint job with white racing stripes had been meticulously applied just 2 months ago, the final touch on what had been a labor of love and considerable expense. His neighbors in the Oakwood Heights subdivision often saw him on weekends, carefully waxing and detailing the vehicle in his driveway, a point of pride for the 25-year veteran of the police force and current chief of police for Riverdale County. T-Bus car represented more than just a hobby for Michael. It had been his father's dream car, one that the old man never got to own before passing away 5 years ago. Michael had used a portion of his inheritance to track down and purchase the neglected Shelby from a collector in Arizona, shipping it across the country and dedicating countless hours to bringing it back to its former glory. Every bolt, every panel, every piece of chrome had been restored with painstaking attention to detail. The Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, led by its president, Karen Whitfield, had long been known for its strict enforcement of community guidelines. Karen, a former corporate manager with too much time on her hands since early retirement, approached her HOA duties with militaristic precision. The neighborhood's uniform appearance was her personal mission, from the identical mailboxes to the approved shades of exterior paint. Most residents complied simply to avoid confrontation, but Chief Robertson had always maintained a cordial yet distant relationship with the HOA board. On that fateful Monday morning, Michael stepped out of his front door, travel mug of coffee in hand, ready to drive to the station in his prized Shelby. The early April sun was just beginning to warm the cool spring air as he walked toward his driveway. At first, his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing, where his gleaming midnight blue classic car had been parked the night before. Now sat what appeared to be the same vehicle, but painted a flat, uninspiring beige color. Michael froze mid-step, coffee splashing over the rim of his mug onto the pristine concrete of his walkway. The custom paint job that had cost him nearly $8,000 was gone. The white racing stripes that had been applied by hand by an automotive artist from Detroit had vanished. In their place was a color that could only be described as HOA approved. Neutral. The same shade as every other garage door in the neighborhood. What in God's name? Michael muttered as he approached the car in disbelief. He ran his fingers across the hood, feeling the rough texture of hastily applied paint. This wasn't a prank. Someone had actually painted over his meticulously restored classic car. The craftsmanship, the authenticity, the value, all diminished in what must have been a middle-of-the-night operation. His phone rang. It was the station calling, probably wondering why he was running late. But Michael couldn't tear his eyes away from the desecration before him. His hands trembled with a mixture of shock and rage as he finally answered the call. "I'll be late," Michael informed his deputy through gritted teeth. "Someone vandalized my car. I need to handle this first." After ending the call, Michael's police training kicked in. He began documenting everything with his phone camera, taking detailed photos of the paint job from every angle. He noted smears on his driveway where paint had dripped, and upon closer inspection, discovered a business card tucked under his windshield wiper. Precision Painting LLC, HOA-approved contractor. It took every ounce of his professional restraint not to storm directly to Karen Whitfield's house at that moment. Instead, Michael called the painting company listed on the card. The receptionist cheerfully informed him that yes, they had completed a compliance painting job at his address last night, authorized by the Oakwood Heights HOA under violation. Code 27B. Vehicles with non-conforming colors visible from the street. Michael thanked her with forced politeness and requested copies of the work order and authorization forms. Next, he called the station and requested an officer to come document the damage. If this was going to turn into a legal matter, and he was certain it would, he needed everything by the book. Within 20 minutes, Officer Jenkins was photographing the car and taking Michael's statement. Neighbors had begun to gather, whispering among themselves at the unusual sight of a police cruiser in front of the chief's house. "Any idea who might have authorized this, Chief?" Jenkins asked as he jotted notes in his report. "Oh, I have more than an idea," Michael replied, watching as Karen Whitfield's front door opened across the street. The HOA president was stepping out to retrieve her morning newspaper, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon her. Michael crossed the street with measured steps, his police chief's badge gleaming on his chest. Officer Jenkins followed at a respectful distance, still taking notes. Karen noticed their approach and straightened up, smoothing her cardigan with one hand while clutching her newspaper with the other. "Good morning, Chief Robertson," she said, her smile faltering as she registered his expression. "Is something wrong?" "Ms. Whitfield," Michael began, his voice unnervingly calm. "Can you explain why the Oakwood Heights HOA authorized a painting contractor to repaint my vehicle without my knowledge or consent?" Karen's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, recognition, defensiveness, and finally, a dawning horror. "Your vehicle? That classic car? But we sent notices about non-conforming vehicles. 3 notices, in fact." Michael maintained his composure as neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual confrontation. "Ms. Whitfield, I never received any such notices. More importantly, you have no legal right to alter someone's private property, especially a collector's vehicle worth over $60,000. Karen's eyes widened at the figure. "But the bylaws clearly state—" "The bylaws," Michael interrupted, "regardless of what they state, do not supersede state law regarding private property. What you've authorized constitutes criminal damage to property, potentially grand theft, if the value depreciation exceeds certain thresholds, and trespassing." The color drained from Karen's face as she began to understand the gravity of the situation. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It was that blue car with the stripes? In your driveway?" "Yes, Ms. Whitfield. My 1967 Shelby GT 500 that I've spent 3 years restoring, a vehicle that was just significantly devalued by unauthorized painting." "But the car has been sitting there for months," Karen protested weakly. "The HOA rules state that vehicles must be in community-approved colors if visible from the street." Michael's jaw tightened. "That rule applies to houses, Ms. Whitfield, not to privately owned vehicles. And even if it did, your proper recourse would be fines or legal action, not taking matters into your own hands." By noon, the story had spread throughout the police department. By 3 o'clock, local news vans were parked along Oakwood Heights Drive. The headline was irresistible: "Joe paints police chief's classic car without permission." Michael had already contacted his attorney and filed a formal police report. The painting company, frantically trying to distance themselves from the debacle, provided all documentation showing that Karen had specifically pointed out the eyesore vehicle and demanded it be painted to match community standards during the HOA's Night Painting Initiative, a program designed to address violations while homeowners were asleep to minimize confrontation. The estimated cost to professionally strip the unauthorized paint and restore the Shelby to its original condition was nearly $12,000, with no guarantee that the original finish could be perfectly recreated. Additionally, the car's collector value had been compromised by the unauthorized modification, potentially reducing its value by tens of thousands of dollars. Karen and the entire HOA board received hand-delivered notices informing them of pending legal action for criminal damage to property, trespassing, and violating multiple state laws regarding property rights. The painting company was facing its own legal troubles for failing to verify proper authorization before modifying someone's vehicle. At an emergency HOA meeting called that evening, residents who had long chafed under Karen's strict regime came forward with their own stories of HOA overreach. By meeting's end, Karen and 3 board members had resigned, and a motion to completely revise the HOA bylaws had passed unanimously. 2 months later, Michael stood in the specialized auto body shop watching as experts carefully removed the last of the beige paint from his Shelby's trunk. The process had been painstaking, chemical strippers followed by gentle sanding, being careful not to damage the original metal beneath. "We got lucky, Chief," said Tony, the restoration specialist. "Whoever did this used cheap paint that hadn't fully bonded with your clear coat. Another few days and it would have been much worse." The restoration was being paid for entirely by Karen Whitfield and the former HOA board members as part of the settlement agreement. Michael had considered pressing criminal charges but ultimately decided against it after a tearful apology from Karen and her agreement to cover all costs plus diminished value compensation. "Will it be exactly the same?" Michael asked, running his hand along the partially restored fender where the original midnight blue was beginning to reappear. "Pretty close," Tony replied. "We've matched the original paint code, and I've got the same guy who did your racing stripes coming in next week. Might even be a bit better than before, to be honest." The incident had made national news and sparked discussions about HOA powers and limitations across the country. 3 state legislators had contacted Michael about using his experience to draft new laws protecting homeowners from overreach. His unwanted fame had also connected him with a network of classic car enthusiasts who had provided valuable resources for the restoration. 6 months after the incident, Michael drove his fully restored Shelby GT500 down Oakwood Heights Drive. The midnight blue paint gleamed in the autumn sunlight, white racing stripes crisp against the deep color. He pulled into his driveway and smiled at the classic car enthusiast sign that now stood in his front yard, approved by the new HOA board that he himself now chaired. The neighborhood had transformed in the aftermath of what locals now called Paintgate. The revised HOA bylaws focused on community enhancement rather than restriction, with new programs supporting individual expression while maintaining reasonable standards. Property values had actually increased as the neighborhood gained a reputation for its balance of quality maintenance and personal freedom. Karen Whitfield had moved away shortly after the settlement, but not before Michael had invited her to see the restored Shelby. It had been an awkward but necessary meeting, a chance for both to make peace with the incident that had connected their lives in such an unusual way. As Michael parked and stepped out of his car, his new neighbor waved from across the street. "Beautiful car, Chief? Bringing it to the neighborhood car show next weekend?" "Wouldn't miss it," he called back, admiring how the sunlight played off the polished hood. The car was more than just restored. It had become a symbol of standing up for what's right, even in the face of seemingly trivial injustices. He ran his hand along the fender one more time before heading inside, grateful that the whole ordeal had ultimately led to positive change. Sometimes, he reflected, it takes something drastic to make people recognize when rules have gone too far. And sometimes, it takes a midnight blue Shelby GT500 and a police chief to remind an HOA that there are limits to their power after all.